Hello, my name is Jerry Beal, and this is another one of the series that I'm doing here. This will be on my own life story, and need to remind you that I don't have the video doesn't work on my YouTube, and so I'd rather you just listen to it anyway. My life story is the perfect storm for me to become basically enlightened. As you're listening or reading this, please consider firstly the following quote from A Course in Miracles that could be used right now by psychologists to very greatly help all of us understand why people behave the way they do. Why do we behave the way we do? And then people wonder why afterwards that they seem to have to, that they had to do the behavior that they had to do. All of us are in that same situation. It's just that not all of us behave in ways that are really consequential. And so, I'm talking about gossip, telling somebody off, and that kind of thing. We just do it, and then afterwards we say, I wished I hadn't have done that. So why do you do that? I'll tell you why. In fact, A Course in Miracles will tell you why. Just think about the guy in Colorado who shot up, murdered, and maimed so many that time. Just think about him. He'd already told his therapist that he might act out violently, and he was afraid he would act out violently, which he certainly did do. So think about the following insight that addresses that directly, a quote from the Course in Miracles. Here it is. Every decision you make, think about it, every decision you make stems from what you think you are and represents the value you put upon yourself. What you think you are can be very hateful. And what this strange image makes you do can be very destructive. And yet the destruction is no more real than the image is. The last portion of that quote comes from from what A Course in Miracles puts as its bottom line statement: nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. That's its bottom line statement. Then it goes on to say, herein lies the peace of God, which means the peace of God is the experiential effect. The peace of God is the experiential effect of knowing that nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists. That's the ultimate situation that we're in, you could say. For in the very end, we're only involved in what Genesis refers to as the deep sleep of Adam. And don't you know that never does the Bible give any references to the idea that Adam ever awakened from his deep sleep, and yet it goes right on giving the generations of Adam down to the New Testament times, which ties us into the deep sleep of Adam. While you're either reading or listening here and wondering why I would misbehave like I did, and even like the guy did that shot up the theater in Colorado, or the guy who shot up the school in Connecticut, please remember that quote, especially that part, and what this strange image makes you do. What this strange image makes you do can be very destructive. Okay, remember that. In the writing and the YouTube presentation I did regarding cause and effect parenting, I explained how in our kind of a society where we very stupidly go around labeling the people, things, conditions, and events of our lives in the polarizing categories of good and evil, right and wrong, it causes us to polarize our sense of selves as well. And we gain and maintain our body-oriented sense of self and our sense of selves, or senses of selves, by what we're believing other people are believing about us. Did you get that? That's how we gain and maintain our body-oriented sense of self, by what we're believing other people are believing about us. Or, in my case, it was God. What God was believing about me, how I thought God was believing about me. Anyway, that insight comes from Charles Cooley. Mostly our parents, older siblings, and early teachers are the ones that give us our programming. We get our sense of self programming from our own defining mind context about what we think others are thinking about us. So all of us have various degrees of the good guy sense of self and the bad guy sense of self acting out as though on their own. That's why you often think or say, now why did I go and do a stupid thing like that? Even when you find yourself seeming to need to give someone else a piece of your mind and tell them off, even though afterwards you wished you hadn't have done that, that comes because our sense of self ideas are moving the body to action. The mind is, through our belief systems. And a body without an idea to move it to action will just sit there or stand there and look stupid. Think about that. It's just that our adult minds are all filled up with wrong-minded thinking, incorrect-minded thinking, and so our body is subject to a continual stream of mind chatter. Just realize that. That's okay. That's what makes our body seem to be us, as it is always following the orders of our self-beliefs, except when we're asleep at night. And then our mind splits. Then when our mind splits when we're asleep at night, it gives us the experience of that twice removed sense of self operating in our night dreams. You see that? When you close your eyes at night, your eyes are closed, and then you start seeing through different eyes in your dreams. Those are your dreaming eyes. The dreamer in the dream is also apparently seeing. Okay, with this going on, it's almost like the good guy's sense of self is trying to hold the bad guy's sense of self back from telling someone off. Like, should I tell him off or shouldn't I? Should I tell him off? Shouldn't I? Yeah, I'm going to tell him off. And I know you've felt those feelings before. All of us have. And then there are all kinds of human activities that, what I'm saying about that, it seems to trump your own will. I don't want to, but I guess I have to. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to tell him off. And then you do, and then you wished you hadn't have done. And then there are all kinds of human activities that come about, sometimes good, as we suppose, and sometimes bad, as we suppose. And they come about because our body's actions are virtually like a robot, operating through its sense of self-programming. We're always coming from some sense of self-programming. With that in mind and moving on, what I mean by someone becoming enlightened, I told you in my beginning, it says that my life was the perfect storm for me to become basically enlightened. What I mean by that is that when that one starts using right, as in correct-minded thinking, by realizing what I call human truth, which is only human interpretations are able to cause human feelings and human experiences. That's what I call human truth. Only human interpretations are able to cause human feelings and human experiences. At that point, that one is born again, as the cause self, maybe desperately trying to hold on to this new truth to grow as the cause self. When a baby is born, they need a lot of nurturing in order to keep on growing and living. When you're born again, you realize that only interpretations are causing experiences, but then you need to nurture that in order to hang on to it. Otherwise, you'll slip right back into wrong, incorrect-minded thinking again. And so by realizing he's been playing the roles of an effect self, that's what the cause self realizes. We realize we've been playing the roles of an effect self by taking by taking honest responsibility for all of our feelings and all of our experiences and all of the time. Then we're nurturing the cause self in us, and using right-minded thinking to do it. Can you even begin to imagine what a social world would be like if everyone were taking honest responsibility for their feelings and experiences, which, by the way, is our obligation? with only lies and illusions to blame for my upset feelings and even supposed bad behavior, and realizing that nearly the whole entire human family is presently imprisoned in these lies and illusions, it gives me the wonderful opportunity to stop blaming others for what they cannot cause. You see, that's my wonderful opportunity to stop blaming others for what they cannot cause. And that would be my own problematic feelings and problematic experiences. I don't think you can imagine a social world like that, because it's hardly ever entered your portion of our mind for all of your life. That is, if you're among the 95% plus of humanity who are currently and have always been currently using wrong-minded thinking, as in incorrect-minded thinking, the world is affecting me. Okay, my main point. The main point of writing about my life is for you to understand and try to feel the feelings that I, as a young and growing boy and later adult who got all mixed up with a sexual addiction of indecent exposure as early on as around 13 or 14 years old. I tried so hard to resist and stop such human nonsense, but only got mired down in it more and more, just like the tar baby scene at Briar Rabbit in the Uncle Remus story we read when we read as kids. I unconsciously and from time to time supported and sustained that sexual addiction for the next 30 very agonizing and very anguishing years. During that time, now listen to this, during that time I went to more than 60 expensive sessions with traditionally educated clinical psychologists, and I never got a damn bit of good in helping me overcome those horrible and very compulsive feelings. I'm not blaming them personally, but by God am I blaming them professionally. I sure as hell am blaming them professionally. They should have known that. I also prayed to God thousands of times, often with lots of emotion involved, and even begging and pleading for God to help me overcome those horrible urges to act out sexually that way. But no relief came. In fact, it only seemed to get worse the more I prayed and the harder I tried to stop behaving that way. Or I could say the relief didn't come the way I thought it would come. It came completely and convincingly through the truth that sets all of us free from that which really binds us. And I have a Course in Miracles to greatly thank for helping me that way. I regard it as a masterpiece of psychology. And so for the last 20 years, be sure and get this, for the last 20 years I've been completely free of those horrible urges to act out sexually. And what a relief it has been for me to finally feel free of such binding restrictions I felt through all of those years. Let me qualify that just a little bit. Okay, the more from when I very first started applying what I call the psychology and therapy of personal honesty and personal responsibility, when I very first started applying that, I still had the urges, but I didn't act on them. I was able to do it in other ways. I was able to handle things in other ways. And then as time and progress and my own mind training kept on going, practicing right-minded thinking, then, in a very short time, I'd say about 3 or 4 years, so it'd be like 16 or 17 years, I've been absolutely free of all those horrible feelings. Okay, that's what I wanted to say as a comment. But then, from A Course in Miracles, and a little over 20 years ago, I started, as I said, to develop a new psychology and a new therapy from what I was learning there. I call this new psychology and new therapy the psychology and therapy of personal honesty and personal responsibility. It works wonderfully and all the time, only conditioned on the person's practicing and extending of right-minded thinking, as in correct-minded thinking. And in effect, the whole process of beginning to let go of wrong, incorrect-minded thinking, the world is affecting me, and to provide enough space in my mind to take on right-minded thinking as incorrect-minded thinking, which is only human interpretations are able to cause human feelings and human experiences. Okay, the next subtopic, who is to blame for my problems? Since non-body related problems are not real, then no one is to blame for my problems, but lies and illusions are to blame for everyone's supposed problems. And by the way, there are no bad people. There are only bad ideas. And bad ideas move bodies to participate in what we think of as bad conditions and bad events. Now, about me personally, and I hope you got that. There are no bad people. That's where we get all confused, is in those degrees of who's worse and who's is better and worse, because better and worse is an illusion too when it has to do with the people, things, conditions, and events of our lives. That's an illusion, and that's the great. I mean, you've never heard a headline that could match that. There's no such thing as better and worse. There isn't. And here we are fighting over better and worse all of our lives. Now about me personally. While I was growing up, my dad was very intimidating for me and my siblings, even though they don't remember him quite as I did. He was the most disciplining person I ever knew in my life, and he was damn proud of it. And I was around him quite a bit more than any of the other 6 of his kids. None of his kids, certainly including me, ever joked around with him, where his actions or demeanor would have been the joking subject. He was just way too intimidating for that. To say he couldn't take a joke is putting it lightly. At least he couldn't take a joke from his own kids, and I don't remember of any of us ever attempting it. He didn't do well with children running and playing and just doing what young and growing children do, and this by his own admission. He told me that at least a few times later on when I had my own family. It was probably that way because he had a very short childhood. When his father died, when he was only 11 years old. He was only 11 years old when his father died, and he had to be the father role in the family. He had adult responsibilities very early on in his life, and so he didn't grow up like other children did. But he did quite well with adults. He was outgoing and welcoming with adults, and when he died, they had to open up an overflow portion of the Mormon chapel his funeral was held in because there were so many people who wanted to attend. My point is, I developed manliness issues, and only a part of that was due to me not having a manly type relationship with my dad. And I don't blame him. Everybody grows up differently than other people do, and it's always my own defining mind context that I'm relating to anyway. I would never even think of taking the way I was, the way my demeanor was when I was a kid. I would never even think of talking, this is relative to my dad. I would never even think of talking things over with my dad relative to a personal nature. And our mother wasn't one who any of us would do that with either, even though I had a very warm and loving relationship with her. No, the main reason I got caught up in that sexual addiction and so early is because I was just way too serious about living the commandments of God and jumping through various religious hoops trying to please God, as I supposed. And then, later on, and especially around sexual issues, failing to live up to my versions of God's expectations for me. So many times, I would start visualizing various girls my age naked and even having sex with them. I would start that visualizing, and then I would try to stop it, because I was taught that even visualizing and fantasizing such sexual situations was sinful and against the will of God. Jesus made the statement in the New Testament, I tell you that if a man looks upon his neighbor's wife to lust after, he's already committed adultery in his heart. And so what does that do for us? I didn't realize, growing up, I didn't realize what the point was he was making, but the point wasn't that he was telling people how sinful they are to think about sex. He was making a different point, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Then I was also, back to when I was a kid here, then I was also visualizing and fantasizing various situations where I would act out with indecent exposure, setting me up to start into doing that by really doing it. This happened especially when I went into puberty late. I was one of the last guys in my class to go into puberty late. We all knew that kind of thing because we were required, all of us guys were required to walk to and from the showers in junior high and high school and stuff, especially in junior high, when some kids had gone into puberty and others hadn't. Walk to and from the showers after gym class, or after our gym class to shower, and the gym teacher wouldn't permit the guys to walk to and from the showers with a towel over our genitals. Be a man, he would bark out, as he would pull down the towel from some of the guys who wanted to be more private that way. So I had that complex working against me too. I shouldn't have been so put off by going into puberty late, but I was anyway. I was just that way. In the grade school and all of that, I was one of the, I don't know what you'd call it, tough guys, but us guys wrestled around a lot, and I usually won most of those kinds of things. So I thought of myself more in a macho way, and then when going into puberty late, it just didn't set well with me at all. And I don't even know now why I took sinning so serious, but I did. I really took it serious. I remember how I wanted so much to qualify for God's acceptance and to be acceptable, when a lot of Mormons believed Jesus would return before our generation had died to start the new 1,000 years millennium. That was a really big deal for me then. I really had hoped that I would be around for it. But what I'm finding out now is what this is all about. The return of Christ. What if it's the return of truth, the truth that Christ taught, that Jesus taught? What if that's what it is? Anyway, when my buddies and I were around and about, like in junior high school and such, sometimes they would steal candy and gum along with toy trinkets from various stores. Sometimes they would sneak around and find cigarettes to smoke and even drink a beer or two. But I would have nothing to do with that, even though I didn't have the integrity to say much about them doing it. But I didn't just resist those things. I thought of them as very serious sins. I'm not kidding you, I did. Very serious sins, and I guess mostly it was for me, I didn't so much think that other people were such terrible sinners, but I thought it would be such a terrible thing for me to be doing it. We were taught to choose the right in junior Sunday school as early on as 4 or 5 years old. But choosing the right is also choosing to judge. And so I, right along with the other Mormons, grew up being pretty judgmental. And so I went right on judging myself and others as we were taught the Mormon God wanted us to do, to judge ourselves and others. Boy, was I ever incorrect about that. In choosing the right, people also end up noticing the wrong in themselves and others. And and what we always look for and find in others what we don't like within ourselves. That's just the way things go. It comes about by, if you think I'm so bad, just look at that terrible guy over there. Especially sex offenders, by the way. They're treasured in our society because they're always the fall guy. No matter how bad you think I am, there's the sex offender. I mean, how low can you go? They're the ultimate bad, terrible person. Anyway, as I said, in choosing the right, people also end up noticing the wrong in themselves and others, as if right and wrong moralistically existed in the first damn place. It doesn't exist in the first damn place is what I'm saying, moralistically. When all that bullshit can only be game playing because of so many things I've already put forth in the writings I've done and the recordings I've made. And so guilty projections, judging of others and ourselves, was a way of life for me growing up. Yuck. I think the Mormon leadership had it. The stricter we are with the people, the better the people will be. Sort of like parents. The Mormon leadership are sort of like our parents, and if they're really strict with us, then we'll really behave ourselves. Then came masturbation. The Mormon leadership declares masturbation is wrong and therefore a sin. But only young men and sometimes young ladies were asked every 6 months by the bishop of the congregation if they had masturbated since the last time they were interviewed by the bishop. And so we either lied about it or we confessed to it. Because nobody I know about, at least the guys I grew up with, ever escaped masturbating, and not just once in a while. I tried so hard not to masturbate, but ended up failing from time to time, and then without knowing it, I was strengthening the bad guy's sense of self in me. What you think you are can be very hateful, and what this strange image makes you do can be very destructive. And so I was strengthening the bad guy's sense of self in me, who became very strong and very powerful in my life. I masturbated far less than my buddies were doing, but they were just laughing it off and joking about it. And now I wish so much that I had laughed it off and joked about it. But I thought about it as though God were looking down on me in disgust and disappointment. And so I was always strengthening the bad guy's sense of self in me. And that bad guy's sense of self was, I am bad, wrong, and unworthy in a sexual way. And then it moved on to, I am bad, wrong, and unworthy in a sexually addictive way through indecent exposure, and so it was. And the more and harder I tried to tame down my raging hormones and quit thinking and visualizing the girls that way, the worse it seemed to get for me. Then, and because I was late going into puberty, and then when I did go into puberty and found that I was just as adequate as the other guys were relative to genitals, I probably, mostly unconsciously, felt I had something to prove that I didn't before believe about myself. I hope you're getting that. I felt like I had something to prove that I didn't before believe about myself. So I was visualizing myself exposing my genitals to women and girls. And the bad guy sense of self in me was getting more and more powerful through my resistance. It was later that I realized what I had heard before, that which you resist will surely persist. Boy, do I ever know that. Absolutely it persists. My mind took it from there, and when I was barely 16 years old, and one night about midnight, and after I had thought about it many times, I drove our family car over to a neighboring town. This is about midnight. I sat in the car for a while, trying to stop myself from doing what I was about to do, but I couldn't stop myself from doing it. And so I took off all my clothes and I walked clear around a small city block naked. About the time I got back to the car and had just put on my clothes again, the police pulled up and apprehended me for doing it. At least a couple of people had seen me doing that and had called the police. The people who called the police apparently knew my father, and they didn't want to press charges against me, and so I was turned over to the custody of my father. And neither of us said a word driving back home that horrible night. But what happened was put in the local papers. What I had done was put in the local papers, and where Mormons are such a close-knit group, the news of it got all around the valley there, and for all intents and purposes, I never recovered from such an embarrassing, weird, and odd situation. And it only strengthened the bad guy's sense of self in me. I am bad, wrong, and unworthy in a sexually addictive way through indecent exposure. That was my sense of self. That was what I thought I am, you know. And so it continued to be that way. At the time, I kind of thought that being so confused and embarrassed about what I had done and being thought of so weirdly, that would be motivation for me to stop doing that. Boy, was I wrong about that. From then on, I kept to myself a lot, at school and elsewhere. Even though others knew about my odd situation, yet I think everyone was too embarrassed to bring it up with me, and I sure as hell didn't want to talk about it anyway, and so, as I said, I kept more to myself that way. And by the way, just a few days ago, in the news in Ohio, where those girls had been kidnapped and held kidnapped for around a decade, one of the interesting things for me to know about their kidnapper was that he also talked about his sexual addiction. Somewhere he had written, "I need help. I need help." You see, what you think you are can be very hateful, and what this strange image makes you do can be very destructive. And here he says, "I need help." His bad guy sense of self caused quite a mess for him, and more for those poor girls, you know. My God, I'm not excusing him. I'm just trying to tell you how it was that he could do such a thing, you know. Wow, everything came rushing back to me, feeling so much the same way. As I said, I went to at least 60 expensive sessions with clinical psychologists, and I prayed so fervently for help from God that never came the way I was expecting. You see, all of that praying and trying and all of that tended to work against me and not for me. I was very lucky to be of the attitude where hurting others wasn't something I could do. You know, that's the thing I'm very grateful for, is that I was always of the attitude of hurting something was something I couldn't do. Hurting people, especially vulnerable ones, you know, something I couldn't do. I didn't do much fantasizing of kidnapping any girls or women, because that just wouldn't work for me. You know, I just couldn't imagine myself doing something like that. One single tear from them, just one single tear from them, would be all it would take for me to drop that kind of thing, at least, and at least I knew that about myself. It's sort of weird how this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of life I was living was so prominent with me. I felt it like a very heavy shroud falling down on me and pressing me from time to time when I would act out that way. The famous video of Michael Jackson's called Thriller is really a good example of my good guy sense of self turning into my bad guy sense of self. And I mean, it's just almost as dramatic as Michael Jackson puts it in that video too. It's almost that dramatic. My good guy sense of self hated when my bad guy sense of self started taking over. But as the quote goes, what you think you are can be very hateful, and what this strange image makes you do can be very destructive. And so it was for me, and nearly everyone else. But where bad guy sense of selves differ quite a bit, and most people don't have sexually addictive bad guy sense of selves like I had. In other words, I'm saying your bad guy sense of self probably didn't have a sexual addiction, but you may have had, you may still have too. Okay, I better not get into that more. I need to keep reading here. Here's that quote again that explains the odd behaviors nearly all of us have to one degree or another, where most of the time these sense of selves take on more acceptable consequences than I dealt with. I'm trying to say that the consequences I dealt with were against the law. The ones you deal with probably aren't. Every decision you make stems from what you think you are and represents the value you put upon yourself. What you think you are can be very hateful, and what this strange image makes you do can be very destructive, and yet the destruction is no more real than the image is. I hope while you're listening, reading or listening to this, you're noticing how your own life scenarios are being played out. For me, in all my bad guy sense of self activities, I now am able to pass them off as role-playing sense of selves. In other words, role-playing, you know. Of course, I need to take responsibility for my actions under the law. Of course, everybody needs to do that. But I've become so aware of right-minded thinking, correct-minded thinking, that I truly know our life now is all about role-playing these various sense of selves, at least until some more of us become basically enlightened. You know, and we begin finding out how things are on the cause side of our lives. And we, of necessity, need to do that together as one. Gene Hackman is one of my favorite role players. He has done many roles as both the good guy and the bad guy, but when he might get done with shooting a scene of him being the bad guy and the day's work is done, he simply goes home and starts playing what he thinks of as his actual self, as most people do. The next time someone says, just be yourself, you ought to know that you also need to conjure up that sense of self, defining mind context, and then play that role out as well. You know, you can't be yourself, because yourself, who knows what yourself is? It might, well, you know, yourself is unbounded and unlimited in all ways, but and then our mind tries to perceive that, and it creates various contexts for it, you know, and so you can't just be yourself. When you finally are able to be yourself, you will also then know thyself. Do you get me? When you finally, in the end, are able to be yourself, you will also then know thyself, which is really the final goal of all of us. But that self will be the oneness of all life, whatever that is, where role-playing doesn't exist. You know, just be yourself. Know thyself. You know, it's either about the God of good and evil, it's either about behavior, or it's about truth and illusion. You know, and know thyself is the final goal, and it's about truth and illusion. Me and my own family need to take just 1 second. Stay with me here, because as I mentioned at first, I have 10 wonderful children, 6 boys and 4 girls, all born every odd year from 1971 to 1989. Every odd year from 1971 to 1989, 6 boys and 4 girls. Most of the time they were growing up, I owned and operated a family business in Northern California called Rockland Meat Company. Our older kids worked there to get their own money, and I owned that business for a little over 18 years. Their mom was a stay-at-home mom, of course, pretty much out of necessity with 10 kids. She was a good mom and a good wife for me while we were together, and we were married for 23 years. Most people who knew our family thought of us as a really good family, and that their mom and I had a really good marriage. We almost never argued with each other. It wasn't in her nature, and I had seen so much of it with my own parents that I was sick of it. And so we just kind of lived together as one big happy family, pretty darn happy family. Off script here, some of the kids sometimes would come home and they'd talk about all the rumpus in somebody else's Mormon home. And they were just shocked that that their friends were pulling each other's hair and screaming and shouting at them, because that didn't happen around our family. You know, it was more like if somebody got upset, the other people just walk away. There's no continuing on of anything. You just carry on, go on and do something else. My then wife knew somewhat about what had already happened with me and my double life, but she seemed to be okay with it. Yet in 1992, I found out that she had other plans that didn't include me. She initially convinced me that her other plans didn't come about because of what she knew about me, and because she could have used a double life as the reason. I'm saying that she might as well have used my faults as the cause of the divorce anyway, because I don't. Well, and I'm going to continue here. And I had been living that double life up to that point. And just before I developed the psychology and therapy that I was talking about that allowed me to be free of that sexual addiction. Neither she nor I had, the trouble is that when the divorce did happen, the breakup did happen, neither she nor I handled our breakup and divorce very well at all. And in all the confusion, my bad guy sense of self, the news of it got all around to our friends and acquaintances, and also it was the first time our children knew about my bad guy sense of self. I just felt terrible over it, how ashamed I felt, because I was so close to my kids and everything in a different way, and they only saw the good guy sense of self in me, I guess you could say. So it was quite a shock to them to find out about that I'd been having these problems all of my life as a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of thing. By then I had moved from Arizona back to Northern California to try to take back the business I thought I had stupidly sold without a down payment to someone else who apparently couldn't drag his ass out of bed in the morning to take care of business. And all in all, I ended up losing both my business and the real estate with it. A little later, some of the details of my bad guy sense of self were found out by my kids, and it included a situation which was the only situation I ever was involved in where the person knew me when I acted out, and my kids knew that person. It was a little more than they could handle. It was a little more than most of them could handle or wanted to handle, and about that time most of them were getting out on their own anyway. As I mentioned before, during the 30-year period this double life was going on, I was apprehended and convicted of indecent exposure 4 different times. It was in that 30-year period. I was apprehended 4 different times and convicted, and so I was required to register as a sex offender, and apparently will remain that way even to my grave, or rather my ashes. When it all sort of exploded, and when all but a couple of my kids chose to disassociate with me, I spent more time than was good for me marinating in my own self-pity. It was such an embarrassment for myself. I stopped associations with my friends and so many who knew me back in Northern California. They had the right to expect me not to be behaving that way. I had been demonstrating the good guy as me, and so I let them down. I let others down, and most of all, I sure let my own kids down. I began feeling so sorry for them to have had a dad that was so weird and embarrassing for them. For a period of time, I felt like I was in the pits of hell, and it was all my fault. And it was. I'm not trying to get out of it either. I want you to think for a minute here, though. What saved me and what kept me going was what I was learning from A Course in Miracles, because on the one hand, I had all this yucky stuff in my life, and on the other hand, it doesn't matter because it can't matter, and that's what I was finding out. But the thing I want to do is make sure, well, I'll read on here. And all I could say afterwards was, I tried so hard to stop those terrible urges. That's the only thing I could say to my kids and others. I tried so hard to stop those terrible urges, but I just couldn't stop them. I wanted so badly to stop that double life, but I just couldn't stop it. One of the demands I was going to make when I finally get a chance to present the material that I've been talking about here, is that I'm going to demand that a woman named Diane Fitzgerald Verbanowitz, who heads up the Arizona Psychological Association, whom I've tried in vain several times to get some kind of back and forth with this new psychology and therapy that has been totally successful for me, and it will be totally successful for anyone who ever applies it and sticks with it. You need to stick with it too. It's when you're born again, you need to practice. You need to continue on the cause side of your life. Anyway, I'm going to demand that this Diane Fitzgerald Verbanowitz, who refuses to talk with me at all, I'm going to demand that she apologizes in a main newspaper to my own kids in behalf of all traditionally educated clinical psychologists for sucking so badly at helping people, especially with sexual addictions, as well as those who they stupidly label as victims of sexual abuse. That may be the way this whole thing plays out. Remember, I went to more than 60 sessions with those idiots, and I never got a damn bit of relief from those terrible feelings that I was having, and especially when the truth allows us to know that no nonviolent, get this now, the truth allows us to know that no nonviolent, non-forcing human sexual activities, no matter who fondled whose genitals, nor what age they were, nor any variances at all in doing the sexual activities, none of them matter because they simply can't matter. It's a thing. Don't you realize that you have to make something matter, or you have to make something not matter? But you haven't put that together because of so much wrong-minded thinking on the other side. This makes me happy and that makes me upset. If someone says, well, they sure matter to me, that's what I'm going to get, of course. Someone will say, well, they sure matter to me, like various sexual activities that we think of as highly problematic. So people will be saying, well, they sure matter to me, and most of the rest of the people, at least in the USA. When someone says that, or even thinks it, you're just a liar. And more importantly, you're a liar that is standing in the way of peace on earth that human truth causes. That's the reason I'm opening up my life here. That being said, and as I've always put it, we can have legal laws any way we want them. It doesn't matter about laws. That's not the point. We can have certain human sexual activities against the law, simply because they're against our social mores, if that's the case, and that's a pretty good reason, especially where children are concerned. But after the fact, after the sexual event or events are over with, at least the supposed victims, even desperately, need to have the psychology and therapy of personal honesty and personal responsibility offered to them, so they don't have to go through life agonizing and anguishing over something that can't matter anyway. If you don't understand things that can't matter, just realize something very basic. It's you, as I said before. It's you that has to make a condition or event matter, or you have to make it not matter, as you suppose. For if a condition or event can't matter on its own, then it can't matter at all. I know you're hardly even getting that, but it's the truth. If a condition or event can't matter on its own, then it can't matter at all. And I talked about a little boy and another one that had that his babysitter sucked his penis 3 different times, and he just went right on playing with his toys. And that's because people's minds are not disturbed by events, but by their own judgments on events, as Epictetus told us almost 20 centuries ago. It's the care and keeping of bodies that matter, and since that's the only situation that can matter, then by God, that has to be our priority as a human family. Firstly, the Earth's environmental issues, and then immediately after that, and along with it, would be ending world hunger and finding ways for everyone to be cared for as to food, a basic food, clothing, shelter, and health care, even if it's some sort of a basic health care. Everybody deserves that. And if everybody doesn't have it, then nobody ought to have it. And wherever else in life the rest of us think we want to be involved in, it has to come after the basic care and keeping of all bodies everywhere is being accomplished. By the way, and by way of me working out my own salvation with fear and trembling, as the Apostle Paul put it, and in me getting rid of my own karmic situation, I deeply apologize to those who knew me and thought of me as a pretty good person, certainly including my own children. I'm so very ashamed of my apparent bad behavior, as I said before, and I don't offer any excuses, at least for the purpose of owning up to what I had already done. In other words, I'm telling you, I apologize for it. So I want to offer that without any without any replies. I don't want anybody to reply. I just want to tell you that I'm sorry, and I will offer it again and again for those who want to hear it more. But here's the point. But I will never ask anyone to forgive me for what I had done. And certainly not God, because my version of God is a whole lot different than it used to be, I will never ask anyone to forgive me for what I have done. I will apologize, but I will never ask forgiveness. That would only be misleading, and I mean very misleading, because that tells you that you can be victimized by something you can't be victimized. You can only be victimized by your own problematic interpretations, even though your body can be victimized. I'm saying that as if everyone I'm talking about and myself were playing a game that we knew was a game. It's a game. That's what I'm trying to tell you. This is all game playing. But in spite of that, you had the right. People who knew me had the right to expect better of me. And I not only was one of the big losers of the game. See, I'm telling people that I wasn't only one of the big losers of the game, but I lost the game in a very embarrassing and weird way of losing the game. And so I, like a whipped puppy dog, I feel like crawling up underneath the front porch with my tail between my legs and whimpering for quite a while yet. I did spend some time doing that, as I said, in self-pity. But just as Gene Hackman, get this now, just as Gene Hackman walks away from the bad guy actions he acts out in movies, they don't arrest him for being a bad guy. Just as he walks away from them in the movies and roles he plays, so am I, and everyone else, able to just all those bad guy human activities, we just give them over to role-playing. You and I have already acted out in our body life. Just give it over to role-playing. And if I wasn't so sure of what I'm talking about here, I certainly wouldn't be telling you this. This whole entire situation has the flavor of, if you stop telling me I'm wrong, I will automatically stop doing what you suppose is wrong. It has that whole entire flavor. If we stopped lying about certain nonviolent, non-forcing sexual events causing problematic experiences, if we stopped lying about that, then the attraction for us to be miscreating the sense of self that then our mind makes us do, those various and supposed problematic activities would just go away, is what I'm trying to tell you. Stop telling, well, I've already covered that in other situations, but it's the word wrong that really screws things up, and I'll go into that. I've already gone into it, but I'm going to go into it one more time where it shows precisely how the word wrong causes the illusion of better and worse conditions and events. How do I know that? I know it because it's precisely how I got rid of, I was going to say, that giving it over to role-playing and that kind of thing. How do I know that works? I know it because it's precisely how I got rid of the terrible sexual urges I used to have, and for such a god-awful long time. You know, when I would create, when I would fantasize or whatever and think through what I had done, it would always be highly problematic. You know, it would be me talking to myself, and I'd say, you stupid idiot, can't you stop doing that? You're just a goddamn dumbass stupid idiot. And it just kept getting worse, that way. Speaking for all of us nonviolent, non-forcing sex offenders, you hear that? Speaking for all of us nonviolent, non-forcing sex offenders, I say this: none of us are the least bit proud of being involved in various sexual activities that most people deem bad, wrong, and evil. But unless this is noticed as the passive and aggressive manipulating game of pretenses that it actually is, we as a human family can be sure we will not survive ourselves. Unless we come clean on this bullshit, we will not survive ourselves with everybody pointing fingers at everybody else. So I want to end this presentation in helping you get a hold of the key of right, correct-minded thinking so you can make more sense of what I've been presenting. Here's the human mistake that almost no one recognizes, but when you do get it, you can take this key with you everywhere you go, so you can in a one for all and all for one kind of social world, you can cooperate and contribute in wonderfully beautiful ways. So here it is again. When you say or think, that person, thing, condition, or event is upsetting me, just realize the actual cause and effect there that you're not getting by saying or thinking this way, that way. Just recognize it. Whenever you say that, just recognize you're not telling the truth. In your mind, you're putting, now listen how this works. In your mind, you're putting your sense of self at the effect of your own problematic defining mind context about that person, thing, condition, or event, and then you're receiving the problematic feelings and problematic experiences that you're giving to yourself. And that's what's happening with people that are supposed to be victims of sexual events. That's what they're doing. They're almost forced to think of it as, like, especially a younger person, a child or something, they're almost forced to think of it as so highly problematic that almost nothing could be worse than what they were supposed to have endured because of the way we talk about it. Call out the National Guard. Everybody's hair's on fire. The child has been profoundly violated. Their innocence has been stolen. And all that bullshit is what causes them to carry these highly problematic interpretations and all through their lives. And then they try to overcome the thing with a traditionally educated therapist, and the therapist thinks the same goddamn way. Oh yeah, you got a problem. You were involved in a problematic event. The hell they were. They were involved in an event. Anyway, I've covered that more in the others. But instead of taking honest responsibility for causing our own feelings and experiences, you, like nearly all of the rest of us, are blaming what is the subject or the symbol. In other words, what I'm saying is the child is instructed to blame the perpetrator for their feelings and experiences, and so how do they ever get rid of them in therapy? Oh my God, I hope you get that. The child, like a child sexual molestation, and so the therapist says, yeah, that's right, it happened to you, and so you are a victim. Yeah, they're telling the child that they're a victim, and then think about the little boy, as I told you about in another one, that went right on playing with his toys while his babysitter was sucking his penis, and on 3 separate occasions. And now the boy, and so he was sexually molested on 3 separate occasions, and he never even had the experience of it. But instead of taking honest responsibility for causing our own feelings and experiences, We just go right along and blame the subject or the symbol. And what you blame remains what is or was as it is or was. In other words, what happened remains what happened. The variance is all interpretation. It's all projection. It's all game playing, in other words. Anyway, this is the end of this portion here. I was talking about the word wrong causing the illusion of better and worse. When someone says wrong, like let's say, oh, it's a terrible thing, and call out the National Guard, and the child has been profoundly violated. Maybe a 10-year-old girl has been sexual with a 40-year-old man or whatever. So the question is, how wrong is it? And of course, if the activity took place for 10 minutes, then it would, oh my God, But what if it was for like a half hour? Oh my God, oh, it's so terrible. So there's degrees of wrongness, evidently, you see? And when there's degrees of wrongness, that's better and worse conditions, or worse and worse conditions, And what that does is it causes us to believe that there are better and worse people, better and worse conditions, and thus better and worse lives, because of the conditions and events. Oh my God, it's something that we're all mixed up in, that we really need to straighten out and within our own mind. We need to correct our own mind, and then we need to correct the mass mind if we are to save ourselves from ourselves. So thanks a lot for listening to this, and I hope you listen to the other ones as well.